I haven't
So
done any particularly horrible things. Oh, once I did, but otherwise, yeah, it's just like a paranoid thing. But thanks for joining us today. Um,
pleasure, Matthew. Hello, Luke.
Hello. Nice to meet you.
Likewise.
for a little weird, it's late night here, and we're going a little wacky, but that's cool. Well, Luke, you said it's actually better for you, so
But yeah, I mean, I stay up till 1 a.m. every day. So
okay, yeah, I do that. I just don't make sense that late, but yeah. So we are tangent happy. We can go in any direction you want. We'll definitely talk a little UFO. The book, of course. If we end up on Doctor Who for a bit, that's also cool. But we'll at
Very
least
happy
paint it
with
out as
whatever.
yeah, Thunderbirds or Go as being the main thing. So what we'll do is kind of go into a bit of an intro, introduce you, talk about kind of well for us, where how we got into this in our lives, do a quick plot summary, and from there just let her rip and see where it goes. We usually roll about an hour, I think. So
Sounds good, gents. I'm all yours. So lead the way.
okay.
all right, we have a very stupid opening. So if you haven't heard it before, apologies in advance.
I cannot wait.
In the year 1966, Thunderbirds were go.
I had a pretty good idea you just take it that way.
Yeah, I thought about doing the whole 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, but it might
That'd
have
be
been
cool
obnoxious
too.
if I dragged it out.
Yeah, it takes more time that way. But yeah, you have already introduced the movie, so I guess we'll introduce ourselves. This being Matt,
This being Luke.
you are in a sci-fi sanctuary. I I'll try. I have to kind of. I was telling Luke I have to stick to my golf announcer voice a little bit because the fam's sleeping in the next room. I did mention we were talking Thunderbirds. I was like, oh, this is kind of this is cool. And my wife was instantly like, oh, I know that. Yes, do it, please. Use your room. I was gonna go like somewhere else slightly, so but I'll try
Nice.
and be polite about it all. Uh,
I can be as loud as I want because I long ago accepted I'm the loud neighbor in this building.
So any songs will be up to you. Joining us today to talk about that Thunderbirds are Go is the son of Gerry Anderson, creator of that very show. He has been doing audio dramas for Terra Hawks, Doctor Who, and so forth. Hello, Jamie Anderson. Thanks for joining us.
Hello, both. Thanks for having me.
But
Oh, that's very cool to have you. No thanks necessary. This is one of the rare occasions where I told my mum who we had on.
Oh, well, if I'm mother worthy, Luke, then that really is something. So thank you. I'm honored.
So yeah, the main topic today is going to be Thunderbirds or Go. But one of the reasons we're chatting now is you have a book coming out next month, getting into the background of UFO and shadow with no W. So what's the dilly on that?
I feel like we should clarify shadow with no W first for anyone who doesn't know what's going on there. Shadow with no W is the Supreme Headquarters Alien Defense Organization, which featured in UFO, which was another one of Dad's series. Their first foray into live action in 1969, 1970. And it was set in the then future year of 1980, so very futuristic. And basically it was a secret organization, as you got in so many Anderson shows, even like Thunderbirds, except this secret organization was based beneath a film studio, providing the perfect cover for fighting off an incoming invasion of aliens who like to steal human organs. So quite dark subject matter, but filled with all the usual Anderson tech and hardware and stuff like that. And this book, the UFO Shadow Technical Operations Manual, is basically, if you have been recruited to join Shadow, you will be given this book to tell you everything you need to know about fighting aliens, driving the vehicles, flying the craft, and where to find the canteen in Shadow HQ.
Oh, that's really fun. Matt had led me to believe it was just going to be a very dry history of the production of the show or something. It's like, oh, he's written a book about UFO. I was like, oh, okay, cool. I probably won't read it.
No, we don't do dry. We don't do dry. The whole thing, the in-universe thing is cool because I think when you're watching the shows as a kid, there's an element of you which is like it aspires to do the thing you're watching on screen. And so if that is joining Moonbase Alpha in the case of our Space 1999 manual, then you want to feel like you live in that world and you want to get more insight into it and feel like you're part of it. So
I
very
think,
much in universe.
I think the first job I ever wanted was to pilot a Thunderbird. So,
well, there you go.
That's a
So,
good job.
well, we'll have to work on the International Rescue manual next, I guess. In that case,
I will be all over that.
I guess we'll talk about at least for Luke myself how he kind of came through this. I'm the American, so I'm the odd one out here. You know, so for me, I do remember Channel 69 in Atlanta. It's UHF. In the 80s, you watched it through like a field of static, and I would watch Ultraman and Thunderbirds through this field of static and love it. And I kind of not forgot, but it went on the back burner for a long time. I saw Team America somewhere in the intern. As far as the Anderson production, the Century 21 production that really gets my goat, it's this Space 1999 set that I just keep rewatching. So that's definitely in my goat. UFO, I actually didn't know so well. It did play kind of like a prime time in the States in the 70s, but that's a little before my vintage. So today I actually watched a few episodes just in fast motion, so I could like get it in. But and having to slow down sometimes because when they're just flashing 1980 to you and stuff, sometimes you got to watch it properly. Yeah. And I will be watching more of it properly. I was doing a cram session basically.
Yeah, well, for me as a British kid born in 1990, like Thunderbirds was an institution. And the bit that, Matt, maybe you don't know, is Thunderbirds had this massive resurgence in the 90s. One of the channels, I think was it Channel 4, just they started airing it again. Oh, it was BBC 2. That makes sense because Blue Peter. And it was huge again. And like the toys were the best sellers again, to the point that a different TV show, Blue Peter, which I guess is like a Mr. Roberts type thing for slightly older kids, they did a series on how to make your own Tracy Island because the Tracy Island was selling out too fast in the stores. So when I was a little kid, Thunderbirds wasn't like an old history piece. It was the hot show that me and my friends were watching. It completely came around again like it was new.
I guess that's the Ultraman trajectory in Japan, more or less.
Well, but Ultraman, they make a new one every year for like the next generation of kids.
Yeah.
For Thunderbirds, it was just 30 years after it aired. They just put it on again and sold all the toys again, and it worked. You mentioned about like UFO being surprisingly dark. Oddly, I think Thunderbirds is the odd one out because stuff like Stingray and Captain Scarlet is dark. That's compared to Thunderbirds, right?
I guess. I mean, none of them for kids shows feel like kids shows. I think, and it was one of Dad's things was don't speak down to your audience.
Right. So
they were making the most epic looking and feeling show, despite the fact they were made with marionettes, that they possibly could. So you will have hopefully felt that they felt bigger and grander, more perilous and more kind of important than other kids stuff at the time.
Because I watched the rebooted Captain Scarlet more recently, but I haven't really watched Captain Scarlet since I was a kid. And I kind of don't want to because in my head, it was like a really serious drama for adults. And my parents were letting me get away with something by staying up and watching it. And I don't want to dispel that by learning it wasn't. So
you wouldn't be disappointed. I mean, there aren't many kids shows where in the opening episode the lead character is shot in the chest, blood spraying from his hand, clutching the bullet wound as he falls off a 600-foot high structure and plummets to his death. I mean, doesn't feel very kiddie to me.
Great, I'm glad to hear that. Before we move on from Captain Scarlet, though, I do have to quickly mention my best friend growing up. His dad was the spitting image of Captain Black.
Terrifying in that case.
A little bit. So... He's a very nice, unbecoming man, but just seeing him, he's like, that's Captain Black walking around in the flesh.
He has the look and feel of a zombie marionette villain, essentially, is what you're saying.
Little bit, yeah.
Did you call him out on it? Is he ever?
Oh, I definitely have told him. I definitely have told him to his face, you look like Captain Black from Captain Scarlet.
Quite right, too.
So, Matt, did you catch much Thunderbirds as a child?
I caught all of it as a child,
Oh,
except for watching
excellent.
it just now.
No, no,
Like,
that's what I was wondering. Had you seen it as a child? Because it's one of those things. Everyone in the UK did see it as a kid and was sucked into that world and believed it. Whereas I wonder if when Americans don't come to it until adulthood, their reaction is probably very different.
I had a weird thing. Okay, so this was in the 80s. Another one, which I think we talked about in episodes, Lancelot Link, another show that I think MTV was showing at that time, where they have like the chimpanzees like being basically prodded in horrible ways to be the actors. And then I'd see Thunderbirds, and little kid Matt was like, "Are what's happening here?" Because you have the super marionette mouth thing going, and I already knew that the chimps were kind of like being a bit abused, and it's like, are they abusing these creatures? But they're just marionettes, so it's okay.
So you
That's
never
sorry, that's 10-year-old logic
right,
at work
but you
here,
never
man. I
got
mean, like 10-year-old.
you never watched it in the mindset of like this is high drama and I'm completely not even noticing that they're puppets,
It's
which
like
maybe has to be a little bit younger.
well, I had no context. I enjoyed it, but I I had no context. I couldn't understand. Same with Red Dwarf when I first saw that at like 11 p.m. on American public television. It's got the big organ theme. What's happening? And then they're starting to make jokes, and I just like that. That was my favorite viewing of Red Dwarf ever because I was so confused. Right?
Yeah. The reason I say is because you mentioned earlier, like Team America World Police came out, and I think the way that treats it is not the way a British fan would have treated it. Team America World Police, they just wiggle the puppets around. They don't even try and make them look good. And that's an American who never got it.
Well, they make
I'm
a
sure
joke.
I'm sure they liked Thunderbirds, but they never got it the way a kid who grew up in England would.
Yeah, they make a joke out of the marionettes in Team America like walking around a lot, which the the 60s Anderson ones are just like usually try and stay away from having these stupid motions. That's why we have like the moving platforms.
Exactly. Yeah, they tried to avoid where possible and have them sat on vehicles or on, like you say, moving walkways. Team America is definitely not an homage to all things Anderson. It was Parker and Stone saying, what's the most ridiculous way we can make this? Oh, I remember that. We've seen clips from this Thunderbirds thing. That looks ridiculous. Let's do it like that. And I'm pleased in a way though, Matthew, because culturally, I always think there's a big difference between the US and the UK. The UK, we're much more used to seeing human characters as puppets in a kind of dramatic, serious situation. Whereas I feel like in the US, human puppet characters are normally sort of comedic or weird or creepy figures. So culturally,
we have the Muppets.
Well, there you go. I mean, but most of the successful puppet-driven stuff in the US are non-human characters. I think all the whole Henson heritage is non-human. And then you look at something like Team America, where it's used in a way to mock. So there's a big cultural difference, and it doesn't. I mean, Space 1999 is the big one that made it into the States. Thunderbirds less so, whereas in the UK, Thunderbirds is the kind of jewel in the crown, and I think there's a big cultural difference there.
Well, you will be very pleased to know that although it's not necessarily big in America, it is huge in Japan.
Oh yeah, my whole family was like impressed by the fact that we were doing this today. So again, that's why I get clearance for 11 p.m. podcasting.
I've just been for a curry just now, and there's a poster which I walk past every time I walk to that curry house or I go on a run on that route. There's a poster for the Thunderbirds Argo reboot that's been up the whole 5 years I've lived here. And just recently, because it was the 55th anniversary, which is go go in Japanese, they had a cinema re-release even. So yeah, it's if anything, it's bigger here now than it is in the UK, I think.
Yeah, it's got a massive cultural following. It is pretty amazing. There was a Thunderbirds cafe in Tokyo for many years. It closed down a few years ago.
Oh, amazing!
So yeah, very different kind of appreciation of the same show by different nations.
Although you mentioned about the puppet heritage, whereas of course in Asia there's a very long heritage of serious drama played out with puppets, be it shadow puppets or regular puppets. So it makes some sense.
Now, Jamie, in the past week, we also had the pleasure of talking to Rod Roddenberry, another, son of a creator who rebelled with Star Wars for many years before coming back and like kind of like taking back his heritage with Star Trek. And I
Yep.
feel like I've seen you have a bit of a similar story here.
Yes, I'm
Going
afraid
veering from
so.
say Doctor Who and back. Yeah, can you tell us a bit about that?
I wouldn't even say I've come back, to be honest, Matthew. So no, so Rod is awesome, and we did an event together a few years ago. Me, and Adam Nimoy. So it was like the Sons of panel at a sci-fi convention. It was awesome. But yes, Doctor Who. There's a documentary called More Than 30 Years in the TARDIS, featuring me and Dad from 1993. In which he says, the greatest tragedy of my life is that my son Jamie is, and then I say, a Doctor Who fan. And it's true. I became obsessed with it when I was like 4 years old. So just as the actual run of the show was ending, one of my aunts bought me a copy of Day of the Daleks on VHS tape, which I watched incessantly. And then my mum, probably much to the upset of Dad, bought me a copy of an early Tom Baker story, and I couldn't believe this show had the same character played by a different actor, and this was incredible. How did this work? And then I was kind of hooked and an obsessed little nerd. And now I'm an obsessed big nerd. I mean, you probably can't see, but over my office shoulder, you can see a bunch of Daleks, and I've got 9 TARDISes in here, including one that is a third scale. So yes, Dad found it rather tragic because he always felt like the aims and outcomes of Doctor Who were a bit more kind of cheap effects and wobbly sets compared to his extremely premium approach to things like Thunderbirds and UFO in Space 1999. But he kind of forgave me over time, I think.
I mean, he could be a little bit right because in the like I do like the past 15 years of Doctor Who I'm a pretty big fan of, but in the 80s I saw the wobbly sets and I was like, what? And then I saw Thunderbirds with the grainy static coming through on the UHF, and that actually was the one that got me as a kid. So partly because I was like, oh, this does look slick, and I mean, as always, already an avid Trekkie. So if you're looking cheaper than the original series, there's a bit of a hurdle there. But anyway, Matt Smith is my doctor. That's the one I obsessed on. Could be the name. I don't know. Could be the Fez.
Great name. You're not wearing a Fez, sadly, but a good name. No, I mean, Tom Baker was my doctor. And then all these years later, I have ended up working with Tom, directing him on some audio dramas, which if you told my 8-year-old self that, I think he might possibly have wet himself.
That's very cool. Mine, weirdly enough, is John Pertwee, because he was repeating when I happened to be at the age to, watch reruns on BBC. And then again, I was very much into New Who. It didn't make it to Japan with me, but I have a life-size inflatable Dalek back in the UK. And my first Christmas after leaving home, he was my Christmas tree. We wrapped him in tin straw and put an angel on his head.
I've had for 5 or 6 years in the States, sent it to my parents' house. Hadn't been to the States since 2010, so it's still sitting in my parents' house, which is a Lego TARDIS featuring Matt Smith and Capaldi. And if it ever does make it here, I'll be building it by myself because my daughter is too old to care about the Legos now. Well, Luke, you can join me for the TARDIS building.
Yeah, maybe I will.
The TARDIS building. That's geeky.
If you go to Japan, get that TARDIS and build it before you build that Enterprise I bought you, I'll be furious.
Before we get too much deeper, I'll do a quick plot summary on the Thunderbirds Argo feature film.
Good luck.
Thank you. In 2065, the spacecraft Zero X is set to take a crew of 5 men on the first mission to Mars. Unfortunately, villainous spy The Hood has stowed away on board and manages to crush his foot in a hydraulic, sabotaging the mission. Fortunately, Thunderbirds 1, 2, and 3 from the International Rescue Force are there to save the day, though youngest member Alan is feeling a bit low that he was not assigned a hero role. A few years later, Zero X makes its second attempt. The Hood also makes a second attempt disguised as Dr. Grant, one of the astronauts. But Thunderbird ally Lady Penelope discovers the ruse, neutralizes the threat through some spy stuff. Zero X achieves launch, and the Thunderbird crowd goes off to party at the Swinging Star Club, though already grumpy Alan is left at home on monitor duty. That night, he has a bizarre dream involving an interstellar swinging star, Cliff Richards, and the Shadows. Zero X arrives on Mars, murders a Martian, and has to make a quick escape when the snake-like rock Martian creatures, try to retaliate. Once back on Earth, re-entry fails, and it's up to the Thunderbirds to save the astronauts. This time, Alan gets to be the hero, scores a date with Lady Penelope at the Swinging Star, and is subsequently stalked by his entire family, all with fake mustaches.
Wow.
So
When you put it like that, I can't imagine anyone not wanting to watch that movie right now.
That's what I aim to please.
Before we'd met, I wasn't sure how irreverent I could get away with being about the material. But my main takeaway from this film was like, what's the point in being your Thunderbird if your dad's not going to let you get laid?
Wow.
But then the other one is like, you go score tonight. You do a good job today, and you do one tonight. So it's kind of like they're egging them on. They all know what the deal is.
Yep. Because it makes the Thunderbirds out to be the coolest guys in the world, right? They'll rescue everyone. They're the ultimate heroes, but they're not allowed to go out and party because their dad's like, nope, you have to be here in case we have to go and rescue someone 24/7.
This is serious business. I mean, just because they're related doesn't mean it's okay to slack off and not rescue people. That is the entire purpose of international rescue, after all. But it's weird that in the series, Alan was really all about Tintin, and suddenly, he's going for the upgrade and going for Lady Penelope instead.
It does lead to Lady Penelope feeling a bit Smurfette in this movie. She's the one girl like all four of them know, and they just go on dates with her.
They just ignore Tintin then, right? She's just there.
Yeah.
Well, he's literally like, I can't go out with Lady Penelope. Well, I guess I could go out with you, Tintin.
The silver medal. Yeah, a bit harsh, that, isn't it?
One thing with the, I guess we'll just talk a little bit about the voice actors and stuff. But one thing that kind of breaks my mind about most of these the Century 21 productions is the lead roles always having American accents. I don't that confused me a bit as a kid. I'm like, okay, almost everyone has a British accent, but not the leads, because we got Martin Landau in Space 1999. Sorry, I've forgotten the UFO actor's name, but he's using the Striker as the character, right? Yeah. So he's got that always seemed a little weird to me. That confused me as a child as to the origin of these productions, I think.
Well, see, when you're making a production in the UK, if you want it to sound expensive and cool, you pretend it's American.
Okay, we flip it in the States, don't we?
Yeah, if you want it to sound clever, you pretend it's British.
Yeah, it is though. It's all about sales. That was it. It was, if we want to sell this to the US, which is the biggest market, then the heroes have to be American. So that was the aim. And also, Dad said one point in the past that there's something much more shiny and believable and dramatic when you say the next moonbound mission is going to be launching from Cape Canaveral tonight. If you say the next moonbound mission is going to be launching from Scunthorpe tonight, it just doesn't have the same ring to it. There's nowhere in the UK that sounds as big and glamorous as so many locations in the US. So between those two things, there's no way that the International Rescue Brothers were going to have English accents, I'm afraid to say.
Yeah, in America, we're just like, okay, well, all of the Roman emperors had British accents, right? Everyone in Egypt.
Yeah.
Oh, and
all of history was British.
Empire, and the Empire. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Baddies in Star Wars can be British.
Right. I guess, I'm like I said, kind of been cramming a little bit, so I was like, yeah, just kind of noting that is kind of a weird thing in that.
Something that exaggerates it is the two biggest British characters have what sound like Americans doing fake British accents. Because Lady Penelope's so posh, and then Parker's so Cockney.
Yes,
although my granddad
bit of
does sound and look exactly like Parker. But any word that's supposed to have an H doesn't, and any word that is supposed to have an H does. No,
just
the other way
puts it
around.
on.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's
Are you
interesting that
having hand laugh?
Exactly, hand laugh. You're related to one character from Supermarionation and know another with your Captain Black chum. So this is
yeah, there you go.
You're clearly intimately connected with this world. But yeah, they were even then those English characters, those British characters, were heightened to appeal to an American audience, most of which they never saw the show. But I think it did add to the shine and the feeling of grandeur, the aims of the show.
Yeah, especially back in sort of 60s through to the 80s. To a British kid, American meant cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, even for me, actually, in the 90s, the cartoons and the TV shows I wanted to watch were the American ones. And when it was the British slot on whatever CBBC, it was far less interesting to me.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'd catch the BBC comedies on public television, have geek whispers in the back of the lunchroom, I guess, in the States. So
well, then you'd remake them line for line with American actors.
Oh yeah, if anyone's ever seen Red Dwarf UFA, that is a crash and burn. It's almost worth watching because it's such a crash and burn.
Yeah, I would say if you're a big Red Dwarf fan, it is worth a watch, but just not for the good reasons.
Right. It's like, what did they do right? Let's see everything go wrong, and now you'll get it.
But what did they do right? Reuse Robert Llewellyn. What did they do wrong? Everything else.
Yeah.
Now, as far as Thunderbirds and a lot of the '60s productions, I guess the really big charm that just hit me watching it after so much time is it's kind of like watching people work on the world's most expansive play set ever. I mean, it's like another Anderson. I just keep thinking of Wes Anderson too, where the Royal Tamils make sure to show you every room in the ship before we explore the ship. It's kind of the same vibe. Everyone gets a code name. Obviously done very differently, but yeah. Maybe UFO kind of being the missing link there because it's live action and still has that weird nitty gritty detail to structure and technology.
Yeah, they were becoming more grown up by then, but I think these days the media bods would call it a play pattern. It's got like replicable stuff built into it, and so when you, as a kid, if you were born in the '60s and you got your dinky Thunderbird 2, or in the '90s your Matchbox or your Vivid Imaginations Thunderbird 2, it was something tangible, physical, real, just like the tangible, physical, real thing you saw on the screen. And there was an element of kind of toys come to life. There was a direct connection, which you don't necessarily get when you've got a toy that's been produced from a 2D animation or even the 3D CG animation. And then you add in the kind of, like you say, the code names, the launch sequences, the repeatable countdowns, all those elements where you could quickly replicate that in real life with friends or on your own. It just had a natural connection where you could take it from the screen into your own hands and into your own control.
The same friend whose dad looked like Captain Black, we snuck our Thunderbird 4s into our swimming trunks so we could play with them in the pool.
He gives me and spit his drink out.
Yep.
A likely story. Oh, that's my Thunderbird 4. Yeah, okay. The first time I've heard that. Anyways,
but going back to the Japan connection, the only other franchise I can think of with that same thing of seeing the physical model and replicating it with the toy you buy was Power Rangers back in the 90s.
Yeah,
a big part of the appeal, and our guest when we did our Power Rangers episode, it was the toys were almost exactly the model they used to make the films.
Yeah.
And so you could take it home, copy the transformation sequence, And like Thunderbirds, most episode follows exactly the same formula. So they're telling you, here's how you play Power Rangers at home. Here's how you play Thunderbirds at home. And I think we would use just any old, Playmobil airplane. Oh, it's going to crash. And then the Thunderbirds come and rescue it. It never got old.
Exactly. I've been kind of having my 847th revisit of, Kubrick films recently. And I would just think of a lot of the shots, switching, doing the switches, lots of buttons being pressed. Doctor Strangelove in 2001 do a lot of that too. And I just thought that was kind of interesting, this kind of 60s vibe that we really want to see, like the tech in motion. There doesn't have to be like any story movement at that point in time. I mean, in this movie, we watch Zero X, building itself and taking off for like pretty much 5 minutes, which
I think it's even
from
longer.
a toy perspective, from a model perspective, that's awesome. If you were trying to put that in a film now, it doesn't go so well.
Well, you're reminding me of the scene in Apollo 13 where they lament that no one wants to watch the spaceships anymore. And I wonder if, because both 2001 and Thunderbirds obviously predate the real moon landings. And was it just that once the moon landing was achieved, the world lost this fascination with just watching spaceships do their thing? Like, up until that point, people are so happy to just sit and watch the meticulous details of plugging in the rockets and doing the switches and in real time watch something fly to the moon. And then after that, there's really no interest in that kind of very slow space cinematography.
It's an interesting theory. I mean, I guess there was no enormous payoff. It wasn't like now we're living there, and now
right.
Humans they've gone and they've walked and they've come back. Right. So from a Joe Public perspective, less exciting. But I will say that you look at a show like Space 1999 from 6 years post moon landing, and that show did go on to inspire people to go and do those things for real. So we know people working at the European Space Agency and NASA who their first exposure to science fiction and to space was watching the eagles fly around and often crash on the moon. And that was enough to get them excited about space. So it wasn't like a kind of switch moment where everyone's like, yeah, been there, done that, got the moon t-shirt.
Oh yeah, nothing's ever quite that simple. But certainly I feel like for massive sci-fi geeks like me and Matt, like we will watch Star Trek the Motion Picture and love going around the Enterprise for 10 minutes in slow motion. Whereas I think that did fall off for the general viewing public and became more of a sci-fi geek thing.
Yeah.
And then obviously Star Wars comes out and completely all of that stuff's out the window after that.
Thanks, Star Wars.
Even that gives you the very long ship shots, early on,
but
right?
The long ship shots in Star Wars are never just look at the spaceship, aren't spaceships cool? It's designed to intimidate you with the Star Destroyer coming over your screen. Or like it's exciting fight sequences. It's never purely just look at spaceships. Aren't spaceships great?
Yeah, a few lasers on the way. One thing I just loved in this movie is the complete and utter impracticality of the re-entry. Like there was no way they were ever going to get two modules coming from different directions to properly connect and land. That's wow.
Yeah. Honestly, they didn't deserve being international rescued if that was their plan.
No, that was the space.
No, that's what I mean. They didn't deserve to be rescued by the Thunderbirds.
Oh, right. I also love that Mission Control is like one dude in this, who's apparently working 24/7 for 3 months, guiding 0X to Mars and back. So
I also really like that Thunderbird 5 is so close to a real thing. The only thing they didn't realize is you don't actually have to have a dude up there. Because, a big communication satellite is a very real thing. But luckily, you don't have to have a guy who just sits up there and flips the switches in real life.
Poor John. I know he can communicate straight away with Tracy Island, yet he has to listen to the stuff in Thunderbird 5 to it's yeah, I mean Thunderbirds is one of those shows where if you start to pull at the logical threads that are exposed, then very quickly things all come crashing down. But there's something that is so heightened and so polished and such high aspiration in terms of what they're trying to do, you can kind of forgive it and forget it for the most part. But yeah, the willful over complexity of almost every man-made machine in that show means that it was doomed from the start. Or the Sidewinder, this ridiculous US Navy walking machine, which at any moment could break its own leg, but instead ends up falling into a pit. Like you said, the Zero X and its ridiculous over complexity for launching and for landing. But that's it's half the joy is seeing how complicated it is, and then the myriad ways it could all go wrong and does.
It's so pleasurable to watch a Rube Goldberg machine do its thing, even when it breaks, right?
Yeah. Yeah,
something that definitely Thunderbirds has given me is a lifelong love for seeing some kind of vehicle or machine that it's like that exists for just this one little purpose. I'm sure we could have done it without building a truck just to do that, but I'm so glad we did.
Yeah.
And you see loads of that in Japan. It's like what could be done by one standard digger. There's 5 separate machines. This one smashes that. This one scoops that. I'm sure it's wasteful, but it's so charming.
What's like one of the malls near my house, they always have a guy directing traffic, but there's a traffic light there. Why is he there? He doesn't need to be there.
But you're glad he is.
Luke, you know what my favorite scene in this was?
The dream sequence with the Cliff Richard and the shadows.
Of course. I mean, I got my Shadow CDs right here. Yeah,
Matt. So, does anyone in America know who Cliff Richard is?
Just me.
Okay.
I owned. I told you I sold a guitar in June. That actually was one of those Burns guitars.
Okay.
Which for any music geeks, I was trading in for a proper Fender Strat, but I kind of just it did a few cool things. So I liked the recreation of the gear as a music dork as well there. So
one of my grandmothers was very into Cliff Richard, and one Christmas we bought our friend Dom, who's been on this podcast now, I remember. We bought him a Cliff Richard calendar for Christmas.
Oh, wow.
And insisted he put it up in his bedroom.
Did he?
I think briefly, I can't imagine it stayed up.
Well, not more than a year.
Almost guaranteed there. Yeah, Cliff Richard is probably an acquired British taste, I would say.
To be honest, I think I'm a Hank Marvin fan, not so much
okay.
Richards fan. But yeah, just to make things clear, that's more of what I'm into. Of these CDs, I just held up. Only one of them has Cliff on it. So
the whole. Do I want to know why the Cliff Richard Wikipedia page has a heading for Scottish independence referendum?
Oh.
Do I want to know where he stands on that and why he's famous?
Does it have a heading for Cliff Richard as a Supermarionation puppet?
It does have Cliff Richard BBC litigation.
No, not that. Okay.
Nope.
But I'll tell you what, there's something that's worth looking at. You may have watched that dream sequence where Cliff and Co are singing Shooting Star. You watch them, the way they dance and perform, and you think, oh God, that's very stilted puppet dancing. That's a bit awkward. Well, I can tell you that a few years ago, an archive in the UK recovered a tape that Dad and his team had filmed of Cliff and the Shadows performing that song so that the puppeteers could mimic their movements. That's on YouTube if you go and look it up. And I can tell you that the puppeteering is 95% accurate to
I can
how
believe
Cliff and the Shadows actually moved, particularly Cliff's sidestepping dancing. It's almost spot on. So they really went to town on the research and on the performance as well.
Sometimes things look too real, right? I mean, what
Yeah.
looks more
Almost.
real to you, the shuttle in Armageddon blasting past the moon, or like the European Space Agency's footage of a probe circling the moon? I'll tell you which one looks more real to me,
Sure.
and it has to do with blowing up asteroids.
Of course.
Also, the lyrics of that song are real creepy. It's like, you have
Yeah.
to love me or I'm going to get my friends to kill you, essentially.
That was the theme of most songs for the 1960s.
Yeah,
wasn't it?
yeah,
So-
yeah. It's the 60s. It's a
I was
different
about to say,
time.
at least John Lennon wrote the same song. He just said he's going to do it himself.
All you need is love and a Glock.
um, oh wow, that derailed my thought. Okay, that's cool.
Oh, here's a
the
thought for you.
Thing's nuts.
Hold on.
I was just gonna say
Go
the
on.
vibe for me was very similar to the Big Lebowski dream sequence. It doesn't really do anything for the plot. It's just an excuse to put out like every insane whim in your mind, and I appreciate that for sure.
Well, I feel like that dream sequence is just there to make this a bit different from a TV episode.
I mean, it's there, I think, primarily because they were looking at ways to get more exposure. And I think Dad had a holiday home in Portugal next door to Cliff
Wow.
Richard.
There you go.
And they basically said, would you be in the film if we made puppets of you? And they said yes. And there it was. And they said that at the premiere, when the puppet of Cliff Richard came along, bear in mind he was a bit of a heartthrob at the time, you wouldn't think it now, that a young lady in the audience screamed and was overcome with excitement at the sight of puppet Cliff Richard. So that says how big a star he was at the time.
Oh, no, I can believe it because my grandmother will go to her grave fancying Cliff Richard.
There you go.
I do feel like I mean, obviously, Live Next Door is a why wouldn't you ask, right?
Mm.
I was just thinking by 66, at least from the American, I guess he never really broke in America. That was part of the problem, right? So
No.
from my perspective, by 66, it wasn't, like the wave had crested. That's too esoteric music dork there.
No,
because
I don't think it was ever a kind of, this will give it added international appeal. And if anything, every time an Anderson show involved working with an actor or a singer just because they wanted to, it didn't really work out, in my humble opinion, because the only other example of that was a show called The Secret Service, which basically there was a comedian in the 60s called Stanley Unwin who was famous for speaking a random nonsense language. Dad thought he was hilarious and said, I think we should make a show about you. So they made a show for kids about an elderly priest who was also a secret agent and confounded his enemies by speaking gobbledygook nonsense. So between saying, hey, Cliff, you're my neighbor, do you want to be in this film? And hey, Stanley, I'm a big fan, do you want to be in my TV series? Neither of those were particularly successful. So I think should be avoided for future iterations.
Fair.
That's where obviously the insane detail to design in these productions like more than makes up for it. But I mean, it's very rare it's very rare you have someone paying that much attention to design, but especially the Supermarionettes, you force yourself to do that because now everything in the shot has to be thought out. Here's something that I was definitely thinking watching the movie last night is I was having trouble just working out the scale of what they were doing, like how big these sets were. Like, was the Mars one that looked kind of like the moon? Was that giant? Because it really looked like a large set, whereas obviously the offices maybe are, like literally the size of a dollhouse. I was having trouble working out the scale of all of this, basically.
I mean, they made them as big as they could, given the budget and the size, the space they actually had. So I think on Thunderbirds I'll Go, they had a warehouse space that was maybe 40 feet wide by 120 feet long. So nothing could be wider or deeper than that, than maybe 30 foot to allow for lights and that kind of stuff. So the 0X model on that shoot was probably 8 feet long.
Wow.
So they went to town there, and I've got some really lovely pictures of Derek Meddings just crouching down and working on it and putting some dust on the wheels and stuff. And this thing was pretty massive. Some of the landscape shots, the kind of big overhead high angle scenery shots, they were pretty large. And then they'll have, a lot of it will be based on the scale of the available bits and pieces they could find, like toy cars, models that they bought from a model kit store. Then they would build accordingly to how they could dress those sets. So there's no consistency of scale really whatsoever between the different bits and pieces you're seeing. And then you've got a puppet which is 18 19 inches tall. So it varies wildly, but hopefully amazingly kind of works quite cohesively once you see the full thing. You don't feel like you're flip-flopping between scales.
Yeah, I guess for me, one of my other obsessions is, theme park rides, especially dark rides, and especially Epcot Center, back in the day. And I definitely feel like these productions, pre-UFO are pretty much like right between what, say, Disney would do for one of their dark theme park rides and, how you make a movie. Like the construction of these sets has like a similar thought process of like forced perspective and, angles and all that sort of stuff. And like, any in-camera effects would be similar to what you would have to do on like a ride, for example.
Oh, and of course, any live action show which had effects shots was models back in the day. And I guess the advantage this has is because everything is models and puppets. You're never taken out of it when you cut from the characters to the ships, whatever,
Yeah. And they perfected it by then, right? They've been working on Supermarionation shows, those puppet shows from the 1960s. So you've got a team there, maybe 250 people who have been doing this. They know all the tricks. They know how to get it wrong. They know when things really don't work. And they kind of were at the top of their game, but for the first time on the big screen. So they push things even further, probably further than was necessary in many cases. So it does look pretty stunning. I think they've just done a 4K release, although I don't know whether that's an upscale or a new scan, but it looks impressive for something made in 66.
Oh yeah. It looks more impressive than the one that was made in 2001 or whatever it was.
We don't speak about the 2004 one, Luke, to be honest.
No. So I think this was my first time watching Thunderbirds I'll Go last night. And I did notice there are quite a few things where it's just like, yeah, I guess that is how you make Thunderbirds a feature-length movie. So having the hood in there, because you've got to have a villain. Can't just be an accident for 93 minutes. Concentrating on Gordon as the young one feeling left out. No, Alan. No, Gordon? Yeah. Alan.
Gordon's a hipster. Gordon's a hipster.
Yeah. Just the little things, it's like that they both did. But then, yeah, being good is the thing that they didn't both do.
Now, we talked about Team America kind of like, like curb stomping this vibe a little bit. I am curious, another one from America that kind of hits similar vibes, I guess, would be the Venture Brothers, specifically going for the Johnny Quest vibe. Maybe you don't know the show, but involves like, does this one make it to the UK?
I'm vaguely aware of the Venture Brothers, and I know it does feature like a dad and his son's sort of adventure team. So there's definitely some Thunderbirds reference there. But to me, he always felt more like a Reed Richards than a
Gordon Tracy. Well, I just watching Alan having so much low self-esteem in this one, they hit similar vibes in that show basically. So I felt like that was kind of a direct inspiration a bit. So I do want to talk a little bit more about UFO in the book. So if last night I had been abducted by aliens, probed, and managed to blow up the two-person craft, does that make me like a possible shadow agent? And what would happen at that point?
You've been captured by aliens, you're in trouble, basically. That's it. I mean, they do all sorts of crazy stuff, turning people into human bombs. Really, really, really dark stuff, putting them in giant canisters of green liquid and taking them back to their home planet to harvest their organs for whatever reason. I mean, they never really quite explain it, and their motive changes apparently from episode to episode. But But you might possibly be hauled in to Shadow headquarters to be interrogated by Colonel Foster or Colonel Lake, possibly.
So you get
but
you get
generally,
bad cop first.
you generally, I mean, you don't stand much of a chance if you've met the aliens in UFO. It has to be said, things are not looking good for you. I think maybe only one character really makes it out alive, having met them, or alive for very long. So it's pretty dark. It's got a lot of the similar death vibes of Captain Scarlet, actually. As in, if there isn't at least one death, then it's a strange episode of that show.
Of the ones I've been scanning over the past few days, I definitely I had to make a beeline for Mindbender because it's a one, super trippy, and two, it's just like,
Yep.
hey, let's just use the studio. I do a Twilight Zone podcast as well, where they often just like use the sound stage as a set. So it's like I appreciate it when you like use your resources that way and make it creative. Working within limitations is just
Well, it was kind of one of the great ideas of that, to have this secret headquarters beneath a film studio, because there is a good, we can provide cover. There's a reason for it within the show. If a UFO is found in some woodland somewhere by some passers-by, then they can very quickly cover and say, oh, we were setting up for a shot, and you walk straight through it and convince them somehow. But also, free location shooting, essentially. You're already hiring the soundstage, you might as well shoot around the rest of the place. And for anybody who's interested in kind of film history and stuff, watching episodes of UFO, it was shot in 2 blocks, one part at MGM Elstree, and then it moved to Pinewood later. There's lots of stuff around the lots at Pinewood. It's kind of like a fascinating semi-documentary type experience watching them move around, albeit with aliens and firearms and time travel and all sorts of crazy stuff going on.
Well, when I watch the History Channel, all of my documentaries do have aliens and firearms and crazy stuff going on. So
no change.
and one thing, this is trippy. Luke, I know you've read a bunch of UFO stuff, but just in like reality, maybe possibly following fiction. In December of 1980, we did have the Woodbridge incident. Do you know what I'm talking about?
I don't remember that one. Remind me.
It's just in December of 1980, there were a whole bunch of UFO sightings at a like an RAF base. So
okay,
it's like when I was, and it just made me think of like, hey, I mean, of course, this is a UFO sighting in reality. So we have over 3 days. I'm just having a look over here. Officially reported, lights descending into the nearby forest. It just came to mind when I was looking at the UFO.
Yeah, my dad worked for a company working on computer systems for aircraft, and he was working on the Harrier jump jet, which was the vertical takeoff and landing airplane. And testing them in quarries, a lot of people reported them as UFOs because people weren't used to seeing something that could fly like that. So I very much believe that there were UFO reports around an RAF base. That's pretty common, I think, in British history.
well, the thing here is it was the military itself reporting the sightings.
Oh, okay, cool. Well, there was a whole bunch of them declassified in the US recently as well.
Yeah, exactly. So, I thought that was an interesting little parallel and fitting the date. We did not get those awesome cars in 1980. I'm a little disappointed by that, but what can you do? I want the orange one for sure.
Yeah, their custom cars were pretty cool.
Like a nice smashed Hot Wheel. Yeah. Like in a cool way. But
they were acquired by by individuals collecting them. And there was a radio DJ over here called Dave Lee Travis, who I'm sure, unfortunately, has become embroiled in one of these post 1970s scandals. But he owned that particular car for a long time, and it was parked up in his garden, I think, in Birmingham in the Midlands in the UK, and resprayed red. So there you go. You never know. They might be floating around somewhere, and you could still own one of those cars from UFO.
Before we get gliding into our final stretch here. I have a listener question for once to throw
Ooh.
at you.
Is the listener your wife?
No,
On the next room.
I would not be asking this question.
Are you nearly finished yet?
Yeah. No, this is about the because you're working on the Big Finish audio dramas. That's an ongoing thing, is it? So
It is, yeah.
anyway, his question. So I'll just read the question verbatim from my pad here. Since the books seem to be connecting the dots between UFO and Space 1999, is there any chance of allowing Big Finish to do the same with the audio dramas, even if it's an alternate universe kind of thing? I guess he wants to hear audio dramas filling in those 19 years in between. So
it is a long period in between. Well, if you listen very, very carefully to the end of the first Space 1999 audio release, there is a very familiar sound effect in there. So, I mean, I'm kind of saying sort of already been hinted at to some degree. I mean, it's not up to me. I can't enforce what Big Finish do, but they clearly inhabit a very similar universe. So I'm sure in time you might see some nods. But like you said, there's 19 years between, so you're unlikely to see characters from Shadow appear on Moonbase Alpha, or vice versa. But I think there may be showing up some more links between the two. And why not? Everybody else is doing it in the world, connecting up IPs, and these two actually did spawn from the same thing. So,
I mean, for me, again, I've seen the Space 1999, especially the first season, like a lot. So for me, like watching a few UFOs in the past few UF days, like I was like, yeah, this does. I mean, it didn't really take too many like mental leaps to connect the two. They seem perfectly fitting, especially if you want to put 2 decades, between them. So.
Exactly. No, they're definitely there. And we did the Space 1999 manual, which features them finding abandoned launch silos from the Shadow Moon base. So, I think they are connected, and we're proving it.
Let's look a little bit about, I guess, just how it's all holding up. Like Luke said before, it's holding up very well in Japan. I guess especially Thunderbirds just has it, kind of has the smell of a Japanese property. In the 80s, it was Ultraman and Thunderbirds, back to back, which kind of made sense. That's something very appealing to kids here, and I've been in Japan for the past 12 years, so I don't even know what to say for America. Maybe Jonathan Frakes sunk that one. I don't know.
Certainly caused some harm to it. Like that 2004 movie on Thunderbirds, all the Japanese retailers bought in all the stock, and then the stuff didn't sell. So for the retailers, they were like, "Oh, Thunderbirds is a disaster now," but it has slowly recovered. And I think like one of the main TV distributors over there, Tohoku Shinsha, was founded really off the back of Anderson stuff. So Thunderbirds is just imbued in the culture. And it does fit so perfectly. And even in fact, I think I'm not familiar with the Ultraman franchise generally, I must admit, but there's a new movie, Shin Ultraman,
yeah.
So there's a shot in there where there's a kind of geeky character.
Oh yeah. He had
shelves full of Thunderbirds gear, right?
He had various like geek paraphernalia, but there was definitely some Thunderbirds in there. Yeah.
There you go. So it's still part of the zeitgeist, and we still get mentions of it here. People mention stuff on TV all the time. I was watching a sitcom on Netflix, and within 3 episodes there were 2 Gerry Anderson references. So it's all still there. 2004 didn't kill Thunderbirds. It's nearly turning 60 in a couple of years' time, and there is that sense that it's not a really old show. Maybe not. It's not like it was in the 90s for kids where they're like, this might have been made for me, even though it was 25 years old at the time. But it still has got a timeless quality because it inhabits its own world.
Yeah, there's nothing else like it, and there's nothing else trying to be like it.
No.
Like if puppet TV shows had continued to be made for 30 years, I'm sure they would be indistinguishable from Thunderbirds at this point. But they weren't. No one kept making that kind of stuff. So Thunderbirds completely sits by itself.
Yeah.
And maybe, a kid these days, would they handle the pacing of an episode of Thunderbirds? Who knows? But we did in the 90s, so.
Yeah, but would they sit through 7 minutes of 0x launching? Maybe not.
Well, not when they've got 4 different screens around them they could be using instead.
I don't know though, but with the colors popping out like it does, I mean, sometimes kids do get really like you're like, oh, they don't have the attention span, but they'll like obsess over like a model, like
Yeah, I
you might see like
visited my friend Katie in the UK a couple of weeks back, and her son is only like a year old, maybe even not even a year old. And if they need to distract him, they just put on YouTube videos of just tractors and trucks driving around doing their thing, and he'll sit mesmerized. So there is an age or a genre of boy who will just sit and stare at vehicles moving for a very long time, particularly in Japan, where they'll sit and watch trains for ages.
And does anyone want to throw out a final verse on this?
We didn't get into it much, but the rock snakes are a cool alien.
Oh yeah. And I was like,
also kind of random and weird.
Yeah, right. But I'd prefer that to the alien just being like a green dude.
These guys were not trained for first contact, that's for sure.
Well, god damn it, they're astronauts, not bricklayers.
Nice. They did screw that up pretty bad. I will say this is kind of an exclusive, maybe it is. We're about to release this Fireball XL5 comic anthology because all the shows existed beyond the TV episodes themselves, and they went into comic form, into sometimes hundreds of strips. And there's a Fireball XL5 anthology behind me that's got some new elements that bring in some crossover with Thunderbirds and Stingray and Captain Scarlet. And we have an answer to what the rock snakes are in there. It's kind of cool.
Although, yeah, to say, if you want to prove that Thunderbirds is British and not American, it involves some explorers finding a big pyramid and smashing it to steal a piece. So there you go.
Yes, the Empire's still strong there.
All right. Tell us a little bit. The book's coming out next month. If you could maybe say where to get it, if there's a special edition, anything like that.
Special edition sold out, I'm afraid. It sold out in less than 12 hours. But the standard edition, which is still beautiful, 208 pages, over 100 and something, 150 plus new illustrations in there. And you can get it from gerryanderson.com. And it's a beauty. If you've seen the Moonbase Alpha book, it's a perfect companion to that. If you haven't seen the Moonbase Alpha book, then you obviously should get that as well. But it's like you've just been recruited and you are living in that universe. You're about to take on the aliens, and you need this handbook to make sure you can do it successfully. So if you're planning on any alien encounters, then this book is a must-have.
I think Luke and I are both planning on alien encounters.
I've been counting down for my alien encounter since I was like 8 years old. So
there you go. Well, we're here to help.
Closest I've got yet is meeting Matt.
Poor Matt.
If you've enjoyed this podcast, you can find us on Twitter at MLSFS Pod. We're also on Facebook, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, all of that. Make sure you like and subscribe, rate and review, tell your friends. And if you want to help support the podcast, keep it online, and find other podcasts that me and Matt make, you can go to patreon.com/podcastio.
All right. Again, thanks for coming in today, Jamie. I've actually, enjoyed spending the past few days kind of like just dipping my head into all the 60s stuff. Like I said, I have a very strong Space 1999 geek, but I haven't explored the other corners as much as I have recently. So it's been fun. Yeah.
I'm glad you came along and gave us the excuse, because I've been telling Matt we need to do a Thunderbirds film this whole time. I don't think his American brain could accept that. No, that is one of the pillars of sci-fi and does deserve to be covered.
It really is. It's sent people on a lot of different career paths and changed a lot of lives, and still remains a thing, despite the fact it's made with puppets and that it's from 1965. So I'm glad you managed to dip a toe, or your entire head, into the world of Anderson.
No, even as an American, I mean, like when I got the email, like, "Hey, let's talk Thunderbirds," I'm like, "Yeah, yes, that should be a thing."
Yeah.
I'm glad to hear it. Well, thanks for doing it.
Yeah. Okay.
That is a Thunderbird in my pocket, but nonetheless, I am happy to have seen you.
Okay, that is our cut spot then.
Yeah.
Amazing. That is a brilliant cut point. But yes,
Oh,
in your swimming trunks.
I didn't even bring up all the wonderfully horrible innuendos in those UFO episodes. That was lots of fun.
Oh God, there's a real late '60s sexist vibe, isn't there, going on? But you can forgive it because it's really old.
Yeah, it
Probably-
is actually that old. So
Probably fine. I left it on air, off air.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm gonna hit the stop then.